The Grand Conclave of Aethel had ruled the cosmos for uncounted millennia. Their reach was not merely vast, it was absolute. From the shimmering nebulae of the outer veils to the densely packed stellar nurseries of the core systems, their decrees were law, their wisdom, dogma. Civilizations rose and fell under their watchful, often indifferent, gaze. Species, vibrant and diverse, flourished or faded based on the conclave's intricate, self-serving designs. For eons, no power had dared challenge their dominion. No entity had questioned their right to dictate the very fabric of galactic existence. Their peace was a heavy blanket, woven from subjugation and fear, yet it was peace nonetheless. Before the stars themselves learned to whisper our name, before the echo of our defiance resonated across 100 million light-years, there was only the silence. A silence born of an ancient, unquestioned authority. A silence that demanded an answer. And that answer, they believed, would be surrender. Then came humanity. Not with a roar, but with a persistent hum. They were an anomaly, a species from the Solaron homeworld, newly emergent from their celestial cradle, possessing a peculiar, unsettling drive. They were not members of the Grand Conclave, nor vassals of its ancient member states. They were an unaligned force, a nascent power, charting their own course with a reckless abandon that unnerved the venerable VRL, the principal architects of the conclave and the calculating xylos, masters of economic manipulation. Humanity, with its rapid technological leaps and its boundless, often chaotic, expansionist tendencies, was an unpredictable variable in the conclave's meticulously calibrated cosmic equation. The conclave watched. They observed the Solaron vessels push past the charted borders, establish new outposts on worlds previously deemed uninhabitable, and engage with lesser species not as subjects, but as equals, even allies. This was a violation of the established order, a breach of the unspoken protocols that had preserved the conclave's supremacy. Their expansion was not aggressive in the traditional sense, but its very nature uncontrolled. Unburdened by ancient customs, driven by an almost irrational optimism, was a threat to the rigid hierarchy of the galaxy. It was an ideological contagion, whispered the Lumina delegates, who feared the erosion of their own carefully managed client states. After centuries of observation, a consensus was reached within the conclave's hallowed chambers. The Solaron anomaly could not be permitted to fester. It was deemed a destabilizing element, a potential catalyst for chaos. The solution, as always, was assimilation or eradication. The conclave preferred the former, cloaking their iron fist in velvet. Thus, the Edict of Subjugation was drafted. It was not a negotiation, but a declaration. A simple, brutal ultimatum, delivered with the full weight of 1,000 star-spanning empires behind it. The edict arrived not as a clandestine transmission or a diplomatic overture, but as a monumental holographic projection that manifested simultaneously in every Solaron-held system. It pulsed in the void above the Solaran homeworld itself, a colossal, ethereal sigil of the conclave, dwarfing orbital stations and casting spectral shadows across continents. Its message broadcast on all frequencies in every known Solaran dialect was chillingly succinct. Surrender your sovereignty. Integrate your governance structures under conclave oversight. Cede control of all extra-Solaran territories. Disarm all deep space fleets. Or face the full, unyielding might of the Grand Conclave of Aethel. The galactic response was predictable. Across the myriad worlds under conclave influence, there was a collective sigh of relief, followed by a quiet sense of triumph. The Solaran problem would finally be resolved. Empires that had once warred with each other now stood united in their expectation. The Vorlag, a warrior race whose history was steeped in conquest, nodded approvingly, recognizing the inevitable. The serene, contemplative Cathar, ancient beyond comprehension, merely observed. Their calculations already predicting the Solaran capitulation. No species had ever defied the edict. None had ever possessed the folly to challenge the conclave's verdict. To do so was not merely suicidal. It was an act of cosmic blasphemy. For humanity, the edict struck like a physical blow. The initial reaction was a tremor of disbelief, a collective gasp of outrage. The suddenness, the sheer arrogance of it, was almost comical in its audacity, yet the underlying threat was undeniably real. Panic rippled through the colonies, a primal fear of the unknown, of a power so immense it defied comprehension. Yet beneath the fear, something else began to stir. A flicker of defiance, born not of courage, but of a deep innate refusal to be dictated to. Humanity had clawed its way from the dust of a single world, navigated the treacherous currents of its own history, and now stood on the precipice of galactic exploration. To surrender that, to relinquish the very essence of their nascent future, felt like a betrayal of their own tumultuous journey. The conclave, in its infinite wisdom, had miscalculated. They had seen a young species, technologically advanced, but numerically insignificant compared to their vast legions. They had seen a fractured past, marked by internal strife and conflict, and assumed a pliable present. What they failed to see was the fire, forged in those very crucible moments, that burned within the Solaran spirit. They mistook independence for recklessness, innovation for immaturity. They believed their ultimatum would be met with the expected prostration, the desperate pleas for mercy, the inevitable, groveling surrender. They waited. The galaxy waited. But the answer that came from the Solaran homeworld was not a whisper of capitulation, nor a plea for clemency. It was a roar, and it would echo through the annals of galactic history, forever changing the very definition of power. The silence of expectation was shattered, replaced by the thrum of a burgeoning storm. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for the predictable. The conclave had issued its ultimatum, a sentence carved into the very fabric of cosmic law. Every species, every empire, every vassal state knew the script. There would be a period of frantic negotiation, a desperate plea for clemency, followed by the inevitable, humiliating prostration. Yet, as the cycles turned, as the stellar winds whispered through systems long accustomed to conclave dictates, an unsettling quiet began to descend. No diplomatic envoys departed from Solaran space. No desperate transmissions pierced the void. There was no groveling, no begging, only silence. A different kind of silence this time, one not born of submission, but of resolute purpose. Within the Solaran homeworld and across its nascent stellar territories, the initial shock had given way to a furious, incandescent resolve. The edict of subjugation, meant to break their spirit, had instead fused it. The disparate factions, the historical rivalries, the petty squabbles that had once defined humanity's turbulent past, evaporated in the face of an existential threat. The Council of Orbital Sovereigns, a body previously characterized by endless debate, moved with unprecedented swiftness. The Solaran Defense Mandate was enacted, a decree that transcended all previous laws, placing every resource, every ingenuity, every life under the singular banner of survival. This was not a call to arms born of desperation, but a surge of collective will. The great industrial complexes, once churning out consumer goods, now retooled with furious haste, their automated foundries reshaping alloys into defensive armaments. Shipyards, still relatively small by galactic standards, worked around the clock, their construction drones weaving new hull plates with dizzying speed. Project Aegis, a long-dormant strategic defense initiative, was reactivated. Its theoretical schematics pulled from deep archives and given immediate priority. The engineers, the scientists, The logistics specialists, they worked with a fervor bordering on the fanatic, driven by a shared conviction that to yield was to cease to be. The conclave, monitoring solar frequencies, initially dismissed the surge in activity as a last-ditch effort to negotiate from a position of strength, or perhaps a desperate attempt at internal consolidation before capitulation. Their intelligence protocols, refined over millennia, had never encountered such a phenomenon. They understood fear, ambition, and greed. They did not understand this raw, unyielding defiance from a species so comparatively young. The Vral, with their ancient wisdom, saw it as a primitive, emotional outburst, easily quelled. The Xylos, calculating probabilities, still wagered on a 99.9% chance of Solaron surrender. But then, the answer came. Not in words, but in a display of audacious, almost contemptuous self-assertion. Across every Solaron-held system, synchronized to the nanosecond, a new signal pulsed into the void. It was not a plea, was not a negotiation. It was the full activation of the stellar shield network, a previously unknown defensive grid that flared into existence, painting the blackness with intricate, interlinked energy patterns. Above the Solaron homeworld, the orbital defense platforms, once mere specks, now bristled with newly installed gargantuan energy projectors. And then, from the very heart of the Solaron system, a single coded transmission was broadcast, not just to the conclave's designated receivers, but to every known frequency, to every listening post in the galaxy. The transmission contained no audio, no video, only data. It was a single compressed file. When decrypted by conclave analysts, it revealed not a message, but a vast, intricate, hyper-detailed blueprint. It was the complete schematics for the Nova Forge, a theoretical weapon system that, if fully realized, promised to harness and project stellar energies on an unprecedented scale. Alongside this, there was a single, universally translatable glyph, the Solaron symbol for no, and beneath it, a numerical sequence indicating the rapid acceleration of its construction. It was a declaration of intent, a gauntlet thrown with a flourish. It was humanity's collective, resounding answer to the demand for surrender, a categorical refusal, backed by a terrifying promise of what they would become to defend their freedom. The galaxy shuddered. The conclave's vast intelligence apparatus, initially dismissive, now relayed the data with increasing alarm. The Lumina, known for their diplomatic finesse, were aghast. The Vorlag, who prided themselves on their martial prowess, were intrigued, their guttural languages suddenly filled with whispers of Solaron audacity. The Cathar, whose ancient predictions had always been infallible, now showed faint, almost imperceptible, signs of recalculation. A species had defied the conclave, not with a desperate, futile attack, but with a silent, ironclad declaration of sovereign will and a terrifying glimpse of their potential. The initial contempt began to curdle into something else, a cold, analytical appraisal of the threat. The Nova Forge, if even partially successful, represented a paradigm shift in galactic warfare. It was a concept so radical, so dangerous, that even the conclave's most advanced strategic minds had only considered it in abstract, theoretical terms. Yet, here it was, presented as a clear, present danger, a symbol of humanity's willingness to push the boundaries of creation and destruction to protect its autonomy. The conclave's long-held belief in their unassailable might was not broken, but it was certainly fractured. The silence that followed humanity's defiant broadcast was no longer one of anticipation, but of a profound, unsettling realization. The Solaron homeworld had not merely refused to surrender, it had declared war on the very concept of its own subjugation. And the galaxy, for the first time in millennia, watched a nascent species stand unbowed before the mightiest power known, its answer a chilling technological. The conclave's silence, once a testament to its unchallenged authority, now held a different resonance. The thrum of a gathering storm. The Nova Forge schematics, initially dismissed as a desperate bluff, were subjected to rigorous analysis by the Conclave's most revered strategists, the Silath. Their conclusions, delivered with grim sobriety, confirmed the terrifying potential of the weapon. It was theoretical, yes, but the underlying principles were sound, and the Solaran progress indicated a terrifying capacity for rapid development. The no from Solaran space was not just defiance. It was an existential threat to the established order. Crack in the very foundation of conclave supremacy. The initial shock gave way to a unified, required, if grudging, consensus. The Solaran anomaly had to be excised swiftly and definitively. To allow such open defiance to stand would invite widespread rebellion, unraveling millennia of carefully woven control. The Grand Conclave of Aethel, accustomed to subtle manipulation and overwhelming force, now prepared to unleash the latter. This would not be a punitive expedition. It would be an annihilation, a terrifying example to any who might dare to question their dominion. The decree was issued. Operation Iron Veil was authorized. Its objective was simple: dismantle the stellar shield network, neutralize the Solaran homeworld, and dismantle the Nova Forge project before it could become a reality. From the deepest reaches of conclave space, fleets began to converge. Not the token forces sent to quell minor insurrections, but the very core of the conclave's might. The Vorlag, their massive, heavily armored dreadnoughts, the ironclads of Cathar, formed the vanguard, their ancient weapons glowing with anticipation. Behind them came the sleek, crystalline vessels of the Lumina, their energy projectors, humming with refined, destructive power, followed by the vast, automated drone fleets of the Xylos, designed for overwhelming saturation attacks. Even the Viral, rarely deploying their formidable Aethelguard vessels outside ceremonial duties, dispatched a contingent, a silent testament to the gravity of the threat. The sheer scale of the assembled armada was unprecedented, a wall of metal and energy, a cosmic hammer poised to strike. Intelligence from the Conclave's deep space probes indicated that Solaran defenses were indeed formidable for a nascent species. But critically, still nascent. The stellar shield network, while impressive, had visible vulnerabilities. The Nova Forge was still under construction, its primary energy conduits not yet fully integrated. The Conclave believed it had ample time to crush the rebellion before the weapon could become operational. Their confidence was unwavering. They had faced and extinguished countless lesser threats over the eons. This would be no different. The arrogance of millennia of unchallenged power settled over them like a shroud, blinding them to the true nature of their opponent. As the Conclave fleet translated into the outer reaches of the Solaran system, the sheer scale of their arrival was designed to inspire terror. Thousands of vessels, ranging from nimble destroyers to kilometer-long superdreadnoughts, filled the void, their engines burning with a cold blue light. Their comes channels, once filled with the Solaran NO transmission, were now saturated with a pre-recorded Conclave broadcast, a chillingly calm voice repeating the terms of surrender, promising swift, merciful oblivion for those who laid down arms and utter destruction for those who resisted. It was a final, grandiloquent gesture, a performance of power for the galactic audience within the Solaran homeworld. The response was not panic, but a grim, unified resolve. The stellar shield network flared to full power, its intricate patterns solidifying into an almost visible barrier. Beneath its shimmering surface, the Solaran fleet, a fraction of the Conclave's size, but composed of vessels optimized for rapid maneuver and concentrated firepower, took up defensive positions. They were outmatched in numbers, outgunned in raw destructive capacity, but not outfought in spirit. Every crew member, every defense operator, every ground troop knew the stakes. This was not a battle for territory. It was a battle for existence. Itself, the Nova Forge, still a monumental construction site in high orbit, pulsed with a raw, unrefined energy. Its core, a swirling vortex of contained stellar plasma, was not yet stable, but its very presence was a defiant symbol. The Solaron Command, led by the enigmatic director Valerius Kale, made no public pronouncements. Their answer to the conclave's final broadcast was not words, but the activation of their outermost sensor arrays. A silent acknowledgement of the conclave's arrival, a stark invitation to the coming storm. They were ready. The vast conclave armada advanced, their formation impeccable, their intent clear. They expected a desperate, futile charge, a last, glorious, but ultimately meaningless sacrifice from the Solorans. They expected resistance, but not competence. They certainly did not expect the chillingly precise countermeasures that began to manifest even before the first shot was fired. This was not merely a species fighting for its life. It was a species that had spent its brief existence mastering the art of the impossible. The conclave, in its ancient wisdom, had forgotten one crucial lesson. The most dangerous opponent is not the one with the biggest stick, but the one who refuses to yield, no matter the odds. The stage was set. The first act of the Galactic Revolution was about to begin, not with a whimper, but with the roar of 1,000 starships ready for war. The vastness of space, usually a canvas for silent cosmic ballet, now thrummed with an unbearable tension. The conclave fleet, an overwhelming tide of steel and energy, pressed forward. Their lead elements, the formidable Vorlag ironclads, initiated their long-range targeting sequences, their primary particle cannons charging with an ominous hum. They expected the Solaron shield network to flare, perhaps to ripple under the strain, but certainly to hold, at least initially. What they received was not a shield, but a snare, as the Vorlag opened fire. Their initial volleys of destructive energy lancing towards the Solaron system. A phenomenon entirely unforeseen by conclave strategists occurred. The stellar shield network, instead of simply absorbing the attacks, seemed to interact with them. Moments before impact, the energy lances shimmered, distorted, and then were not merely deflected, but redirected. They did not dissipate harmlessly into the void. Instead, they veered wildly, some striking conclave vessels further back in the formation, others arcing away into empty space, and a few even curving back towards the very Vorlag ships that had fired them. This was not defense. It was weaponized physics, a startling demonstration of advanced gravitic manipulation the conclave had deemed theoretical, if not impossible, for a species so young. Confusion rippled through the conclave lines. The Vorlag, masters of direct engagement, were momentarily disoriented. Their tactical readouts flickered with friendly fire incidents, their commanders bellowing orders in their guttural language, attempting to make sense of the chaos. The Lumina, with their more nuanced energy systems, quickly adapted, altering their firing solutions. But even their refined projectors struggled against the unpredictable distortions of the Solaron network. It was as if the very fabric of space around the Solaron system had become a funhouse mirror for energy weapons. This was humanity's first answer to overwhelming force, not to meet it head-on, but to twist its own strength against it. The stellar shield network was not a static barrier, but a dynamic, adaptive system, constantly reconfiguring its gravitic distortions based on incoming threat signatures. It was an intellectual mockery of the conclave's brute force approach, a testament to Solaron ingenuity and their unparalleled understanding of applied quantum physics. The initial barrage, meant to shatter Solaron resolve, had instead shattered conclave complacency, while the conclave struggled to recalibrate their tactics against the bewildering shield. The Solaron fleet moved, not in a desperate charge, but with surgical precision. Their vessels, smaller and faster, utilized the very distortions of the stellar shield network to their advantage, appearing and disappearing within the shimmering energy fields. They were not designed for prolonged slugging matches, but for swift, devastating strikes. Their primary weapon systems, designated void lances, were not energy projectors, but hyper-accelerated kinetic projectiles encased in phase-shifted fields that allowed them to bypass traditional energy shields with chilling efficiency. The first Slaron counterattack was brutal. A squadron of 6 Vanguard-class destroyers, seemingly materializing from within a localized shield distortion, struck at a vulnerable flank of Xylo's drone carriers. The Xylos, relying on overwhelming numbers and automated responses, found their automated defenses useless against the phase-shifted projectiles. The Void Lances tore through their carriers, detonating internal reactors with catastrophic force. In moments, dozens of drone carriers were reduced to expanding clouds of debris. It was a terrifying display of focused, intelligent aggression against a force that had grown accustomed to unchallenged numerical superiority. The Conclave's response was furious. Their commanders, enraged by the unexpected losses, ordered their heavy cruisers and battle carriers to engage. Though reeling, unleashed their automated swarms of combat drones, thousands upon thousands of them, designed to overwhelm and assimilate. The Vorlag, regaining their composure, adjusted their fire to target the Solaran ships directly, hoping to overwhelm their localized defenses. The battle escalated into a maelstrom of light and destruction. But the Solarans were not fighting a conventional war. They were fighting a war of asymmetric advantage, leveraging every technological breakthrough, every tactical innovation. Their ships executed impossible maneuvers, dancing through the chaotic energy distortions of their own shield network, launching precise void lance strikes, then vanishing before the Conclave could bring their superior firepower to bear. It was a cosmic game of hit-and-run, played with lives and civilizations as the stakes. The Conclave, for the first time in millennia, found itself on the defensive. Their vast armada, designed for overwhelming conquest, was struggling against a foe that refused to play by the established rules. The Solaran audacity, once dismissed as youthful folly, was now proving to be a terrifying, almost brilliant, form of strategic genius. The silence of anticipation had given way to the roar of battle, and in that roar the Conclave heard a note of dissonance, a growing uncertainty that had not been present before. The galaxy watched, enthralled, as the impossible began to unfold. Humanity, far from being crushed, was carving its own legend, one devastating strike at a time. The Conclave, a monolith of ancient power, found itself in an unfamiliar quagmire. The initial, overwhelming assault, designed to shatter the Solaran will, had instead been absorbed, redirected, and then retaliated against with shocking effectiveness. The stellar shield network, initially dismissed as a primitive attempt at defense, proved to be a constantly shifting, actively hostile environment. Its gravitic distortions turning the Conclave's own formidable energy weapons into liabilities. The Vorlag, whose martial pride bordered on the legendary, found their ironclads struggling to track the elusive Solaran vessels that darted through the chaotic energy fields, striking with their phase-shifted void lances before vanishing into the shimmering distortions. Conclave Command, housed within the colossal flagship Aethel's Judgment, pulsed with a growing, icy fury. The Xylo strategists, whose probabilistic models had predicted swift victory, now watched in disbelief as their drone swarms, designed for overwhelming numerical superiority, were systematically dismantled by concentrated void lance volleys, or simply torn apart by the unpredictable gravitic currents of the shield. The Lumina, typically serene, found their sophisticated energy projectors unable to find consistent purchase on targets that seemed to exist between dimensions. This was not merely a battle. It was a cosmic insult, a direct challenge to the very concept of their galactic supremacy. In response, the Conclave shifted tactics. Instead of a broad, overwhelming assault, they focused their immense resources. The Aethel vessels, rarely seen outside ceremonial duties or the most critical pacification campaigns, now moved to the vanguard. These ships, ancient and formidable, possessed specialized dispersion projectors designed to flood a localized area with chaotic energy, theoretically nullifying any complex gravitic or energy-based defenses. Their objective, to punch a hole through the stellar shield network and allow the full might of the Conclave fleet to pour through, overwhelming the Solaron homeworld directly. As the Aethel vessels began their focused assault, the Solaron shield network, for the first time, showed signs of strain. Its vibrant blue shimmer flickered at the points of impact, localized energy surges rippling across its surface. The dispersion projectors, unlike the direct energy lances, didn't try to penetrate the shield. They sought to unravel it, to introduce so much entropic energy that its intricate patterns would collapse. It was a brutal, relentless assault, pushing Solaron defenses to their absolute limit. Within the Solaron command centers, the pressure was immense. The tactical displays glowed with critical alerts, power conduits overloaded, and secondary systems faltered under the sustained bombardment. The very air thrummed with the energy of the desperate defense. Yet, there was no panic, no call for retreat. Instead, Director Kale and his strategists watched with grim, calculating eyes. They had anticipated this escalation. They knew the Conclave would eventually resort to such brute force, and they had a counterdash measure as the Aethel vessels pushed deeper, their dispersion projectors tearing wider breaches in the shield. The Solaran fleet did not rush to fill the gaps. Instead, they began a calculated, disciplined withdrawal, pulling back from the immediate engagement zones, seemingly conceding ground. The Conclave, interpreting this as a sign of weakening resolve, pressed their advantage, their heavy cruisers surging through the newly opened lanes, eager to deliver the killing blow. This was the moment they had waited for, the breach in the Solaran defenses that would lead to inevitable victory. But it was a feint, a trap. As the leading Conclave elements pushed through the breached shield, their comms channels erupted with alarm. The Solaron fleet, having drawn them into a predetermined kill zone, executed a rapid, synchronized maneuver. From concealed positions within the debris fields of previously destroyed Conclave vessels, and from hidden pockets within the very gravitic distortions of the stellar shield network itself, specialized Solaron ambush-class frigates materialized. These were not direct combatants, but nimble vessels armed with disruptor torpedoes, warheads designed not for raw destruction, but for precise, crippling strikes against propulsion and navigation systems. The disruptor torpedoes, phase-shifted, like the Void Lances, bypassed most Conclave point defenses and struck home with chilling accuracy. The leading Conclave cruisers, caught off guard and tightly packed within the shield breach, suddenly lost power, their engines flaring erratically, their navigation systems spiraling into chaos. They became derelict hulks, drifting helplessly, blocking the advance of the vessels behind them. The Conclave's meticulously planned breach had become a choke point, a self-inflicted wound. The Lumina, known for their tactical foresight, were the first to grasp the true audacity of the Solaron strategy. They are not merely defending. 1. Lumina delegate transmitted to the Conclave High Command, his voice devoid of its usual calm. They are learning. They are adapting faster than we can comprehend. They are using our own tactics against us, turning our strength into our weakness. The Conclave, once so certain of their superiority, felt the first tremor of genuine uncertainty. The myth of their invincibility, whispered through 1,000 star systems for millennia, had been challenged. And in the chaotic, burning void of the Solaron system, it was beginning The galactic stage, once dominated by the silent, monolithic presence of the Grand Conclave, now vibrated with the raw energy of an unprecedented conflict. News of the Solaron resistance, initially dismissed as mere rumor, began to propagate. Through the vast, interconnected network of subspace relays, whispers of the stellar shield network's impossible gravitic distortions, of the void lances that pierced even the most formidable shields, and of the audacious Solaran tactical feints, spread like wildfire. For millennia, the Conclave had been the undisputed arbiter of cosmic power. Now, a nascent species, a mere blink in galactic time, was not just resisting, but outmaneuvering them within the Conclave's high command. The mood had shifted from outrage to a chilling, analytical determination. The unexpected losses were mounting. Not catastrophic, but significant enough to be an embarrassment. The Xylos, masters of logistics, reported supply chain strains and morale issues among the lesser vassal fleets. The Vorlag, despite their warrior code, chafed under the Solarons' elusive tactics, yearning for a direct confrontation they could win with sheer force. The Lumina, ever the pragmatists, argued for a tactical retreat and a reassessment of the Solaron threat. A suggestion met with disdain by the VRL, who saw any withdrawal as an unforgivable sign of weakness. The Conclave decided on a change. In strategy, it would not allow the Solarans to dictate the terms of engagement with their clever traps and elusive maneuvers. They would bring their true, overwhelming advantage to bear. Sheer, unadulterated numbers. The order was given: initiate a full-spectrum, continuous assault. Forget finesse, forget tactical precision. Drown the Solaran system in firepower. They would sacrifice entire waves of lesser vessels to exhaust the stellar shield network, to deplete Solaran resources, to simply overwhelm them through attrition. This was the Conclave's ultimate, brutal answer to defiance: to bury the enemy under a mountain of steel, waves of automated drone fleets, followed by masses of light cruisers. From the Conclave's numerous client states surged forward. They were not expected to win, only to drain. Their purpose was to be consumed by the Solaron defenses, to force the stellar shield network to operate at maximum capacity, to provoke Solaron ships into expending their precious void lances. It was a gruesome, relentless grind, a meat grinder, designed to break the spirit and the resources of humanity. The void filled with the constant thrum of engines, the flash of energy weapons, and the silent, terrifying explosions of countless ships. The Solaron defenses held, but the strain was immense. The stellar shield network pulsed with a frantic energy, its gravitic distortions working overtime, deflecting, redirecting, and absorbing an endless tide of incoming fire. Solaron ships, while executing their precise strikes, found themselves increasingly outnumbered, forced into more frequent engagements. Their ammunition for the void lances was finite, their energy reserves for the phase-shifting systems precious. Every successful defense, every precise counterstrike came at an increasing cost. The sheer volume of the Conclave's assault was beginning to tell. Director Kale, observing the unfolding attrition on the main tactical displays, knew this was the Conclave's true gambit. They were not trying to defeat humanity in a grand battle. They were trying to bleed them dry. The Conclave's strategy was as old as warfare itself: wear down the enemy until they break. The Solaron homeworld, while shielded, felt the reverberations of the endless battle. A constant, low rumble that permeated everything. A reminder of the relentless pressure being brought to bear. Yet, even in the face of such overwhelming odds, humanity did not falter. Instead of conserving resources, they redoubled their efforts. The Nova Forge, still under construction, became a symbol of their unwavering resolve. Construction crews worked tirelessly, their bodies aching, their minds focused, driven by an almost mythical belief in its promise. The planetary defense batteries, previously designed for localized threats, were now brought online. Their gargantuan cannons adding to the desperate chorus of Solaron fire. Every citizen, every resource was mobilized. There was no surrender, only a deeper commitment to resistance. The Conclave, in its ancient wisdom, had always understood the concept of attrition. What they failed to grasp was humanity's unique capacity for it. They saw a finite resource pool, a calculable breaking point. They did not account for the intangible, for the spirit that flared brightest under duress. They did not understand that for humanity, surrender was not an option, but a profound violation of their very essence. The battle raged, a brutal testament to the Conclave's power, but also to humanity's terrifying, unwavering will. The silence of the galaxy was replaced by the symphony of war, a symphony that, for the first time in millennia, contained a defiant human note, growing louder. With every passing moment, the stage was set not for capitulation, but for a reckoning. The relentless grinding assault of the Conclave continued without pause. For cycles, the Solaron system had been a crucible, bathed in the ceaseless fire of 1,000 alien suns channeled into weapons. The stellar shield network, once a marvel of gravitic engineering, now shimmered with an exhausted, erratic luminescence. Its intricate patterns, designed to deflect and redirect, were struggling under the sheer, unyielding weight of the Conclave's attrition. Breaches, once swiftly sealed, now lingered for agonizing moments, allowing barrages of plasma and kinetic slugs to impact the outer Solaran defense platforms, tearing them apart in silent, violent explosions. Conclave Command, observing from the Aethel's judgment, noted the increasing frequency of Solaron system failures. The Xylos, their cold calculations finally aligning with their predictions, estimated the complete collapse of the stellar shield network within orbital cycles. The Vorlag roared with grim satisfaction. This was the kind of war they understood, a brutal test of endurance that only the strong survived. Even the Vriel, their ancient faces impassive, acknowledged the effectiveness of the strategy. Humanity, they reasoned, was finally succumbing to the inevitable. Their defiance, however audacious, was merely delaying their demise. The galaxy, having held its breath for so long, began to exhale, convinced the Solaron experiment in sovereignty was reaching its predictable, fiery conclusion. Yet, within the battered Solaran defenses, something else persisted. Exhaustion etched lines on every human face. But despair was a luxury they could not afford. Crews, working beyond the limits of human endurance, patched breaches, rerouted power, and nursed failing systems with desperate ingenuity. The Solaron fleet, now reduced to a fraction of its initial strength, still moved with the precision of predators, striking only when the odds allowed, making every void lance count. They were not fighting to win outright, but to buy time. Time for the Nova Forge. The monumental construction of the Nova Forge, a beacon of defiant hope amidst the chaos, pulsed with an increasingly potent, controlled energy. Its core, a swirling vortex of stellar plasma, now burned with an intensity that dwarfed the sun itself. Gigantic power conduits, thicker than starships, hummed with unimaginable energies, feeding the forge's hungry maw. Automated construction. Drones augmented by human teams working in hazardous environments, moved with feverish urgency, welding the final sections of its colossal superstructure. Aligning the intricate focusing arrays. The forge was no longer a theoretical weapon. It was a burgeoning reality, a terrifying promise whispered from the heart of a besieged system. Director Kale, his gaze fixed on the Nova Forge's energy signature on his main display, felt the weight of every lost ship, every exhausted crew member. The numbers were grim. They were nearing the breaking point. The stellar shield network was barely holding, its gravitic projectors screaming under the strain. The Conclave's relentless waves were succeeding in their attrition, But the Forge. The Forge was almost ready. Its completion was a race against oblivion, a desperate gamble against overwhelming odds. The galaxy watched, mesmerized. The Solaron defiance had resonated, stirring echoes of forgotten rebellions in the hearts of oppressed species across 1,000 systems. Client states, long subjugated by the Conclave, dared to dream. The very fact that humanity had endured this long, that they had bled the Conclave, had instilled a faint, dangerous hope. The Cathar, whose long-range sensors had tracked every energy fluctuation, every tactical shift, began to update their ancient predictions. Their complex probability models shifting in ways they had not anticipated in millennia. The Solaron variable was proving to be more disruptive than any force in recorded history, as the Conclave prepared for its final, decisive push, sending their heaviest bombardment vessels directly at the most weakened sections of the stellar shield. A surge of energy, unlike anything seen before, emanated from the Solaran homeworld. It was not a weapon discharge, nor a shield flare. It was the Nova Forge, reaching critical activation parameters. Its colossal form, visible even through the chaotic battle, began to glow with an incandescent golden-white light, drawing in energy from across the system, a cosmic siphon. The very fabric of space around it warped, shimmering with raw power. Conclave sensors shrieked with alarm. The energy signature was immense, unprecedented, unlike anything in their databases. Was far beyond the output of any known weapon. The Vral, for the first time, displayed a flicker of genuine concern. The Xylo's probability models crashed, unable to compute the sudden radical shift in variables. This was not the expected collapse. This was the birth of something new, something terrifying. The Solaron homeworld, pushed to the brink of annihilation, was about to unleash its ultimate answer, forged in the crucible of defiance. The cosmic clock had run out. The time for whispers was the Conclave's overwhelming assault. Designed to break humanity's spirit through sheer attrition, was met not with collapse, but with a burgeoning, impossible light. The Nova Forge, reaching critical activation, pulsed with an energy signature that screamed across all Conclave sensor arrays. It was an energy output so vast, so alien in its composition, that it defied all known classifications. For a species that had long defined power by its own metrics, this was a profoundly unsettling anomaly. The expected whimper of defeat had become a cosmic roar of something entirely new, panic. A sensation rarely experienced by the ancient, self-assured Conclave command. Rippled through the bridge of the Aethel's judgment. The Zelos, whose analytical minds had always found order in chaos, watched their probability models shatter. The VRL, for the first time in memory, shifted uneasily in their seats. Their ancient eyes fixed on the terrifyingly bright holographic projection of the Nova Forge. Their forge. It is not merely a weapon, Illumina Delegate's voice. Usually a calm cascade of melodic tones, now clipped with urgency, echoed through the Conclave's internal coms. It is a localized, stellar phenomenon. It bends reality. And then the Nova Forge acted. Not with a destructive beam, not with a kinetic impact, but with a profound systemic disruption. A colossal wave of raw, graviton-resonant energy erupted from the Forge's core, not outwards in a destructive cone, but as an omnidirectional pulse that permeated the entire Solaron system. This was not an attack on the Conclave ships, but on the very medium through which they operated. The pulse tuned to the resonant frequencies of subspace communication and warp drive fields, swept through the Conclave armada like an invisible plague. Suddenly, the Conclave's meticulously coordinated assault fractured. Com channels overloaded with static, then went dead. Tactical displays flickered, displaying garbled data or simply going dark. Warp drives, previously humming with latent power, sputtered and died. Their intricate field generators collapsing under the unforeseen resonance. The automated Xylos drone fleets, reliant on constant command signals, froze in mid-flight, their combat protocols seizing. The Vorlag, dependent on precise targeting data for their long-range weapons, found their systems unable to lock on, their mighty particle cannons discharging wildly into the void. Chaos erupted across the conclave lines. Ships collided, unable to adjust their vectors. Formations dissolved into a swirling maelstrom of confusion. Commanders, accustomed to instant communication and perfect data streams, found themselves deaf, blind, and adrift in the very battle they had initiated. The sheer, audacious simplicity of the Nova Forge's initial function was a testament to humanity's unique approach to warfare. Not to destroy the enemy, but to utterly cripple their ability to fight, to turn their own technological reliance against them. It was, for the Conclave, an utterly humiliating tactical setback, rendered by a species they had dismissed as primitive. One could almost hear the cosmic sigh of exasperation from their ancient generals, realizing they had been outmaneuvered by what they considered a species barely out of its celestial cradle. Amidst the Conclave's disarray, the Solaran fleet, battered but unbroken, seized the advantage. Their vessels, designed with redundant, shielded communication and navigation systems resistant to the Forge's initial pulse, moved through the chaotic conclave ranks with renewed purpose. Void lances, previously conserved, now fired with increased frequency, tearing through the now vulnerable, stalled conclave cruisers. The stellar shield network, though still strained, found its burden significantly eased. Its gravitic distortions now amplifying the conclave's internal confusion. The galaxy watched, spellbound. The client states, once merely whispering of rebellion, now openly broadcast messages of defiance, their populations electrified by the Solaran miracle. The Cathar, their vast data banks updated in real time, registered a seismic shift in Galactic power dynamics. Ateos' Loran homeworld, far from capitulating, had unleashed a force that had brought the galactic hegemon to its knees without firing a single shot of direct destruction. The question was no longer if humanity would be defeated, but what the Conclave would do in response to such an existential humiliation. On the bridge of the Aethel's judgment, the Vriel, their ancient faces etched with grim resolve, came to a terrifying conclusion. The Nova Forge was not merely a weapon of destruction. It was a weapon of control, capable of unraveling the very fabric of their technological supremacy. To allow it to exist, to allow humanity to wield such power, was to invite the complete collapse of their millennial-long dominion. There was only one option left, a desperate, all-or-nothing gamble. They would not defeat the Solaran homeworld. They would erase it. Every remaining ship, every available weapon would be brought to bear on the Nova Forge itself. The battle, for galactic history, was not over. It was about to enter its final, cataclysmic act. The Grand Conclave, their ancient pride wounded, their millennia of dominion challenged, launched their final, desperate assault. From the Aethel's judgment, the order resonated. Every remaining vessel, every operational weapon, every last reserve of energy was to be focused on the Nova Forge. This was no longer a strategic maneuver. It was a furious, all-consuming act of annihilation. The very concept of their galactic authority demanded the eradication of this insolent upstart. Thousands of ships, ignoring their own casualties and the lingering chaos of the Forge's initial pulse, surged towards the glowing colossal structure, their weapon systems flaring with a synchronized, destructive intent. This was the hammer blow meant to pulverize the cradle of defiance, to erase the Solaran stain from cosmic history. The stellar shield network pushed beyond its theoretical limits, flickered violently. Its gravitic projectors screamed, overloading and failing as the sheer weight of the Conclave's final, concentrated bombardment tore through its weakened lattice. Solaron defense platforms detonated in blinding flashes, their fragmented debris adding to the maelstrom. The Solaron fleet, a ghost of its former strength, made a desperate, valiant final stand, throwing themselves into the path of the incoming Conclave Titans, buying precious, fleeting moments. Every void lance fired, every defensive maneuver executed, was a prayer, a desperate gamble against the inevitable. Humanity, battered but unbowed, faced its final defining moment. Within the command center, Director Kale watched the Nova Forge's energy signature. It was at 99.7%, 99.8%. The final conduits locking into place, the last power relays fusing. The hum of the forge vibrated through the very bedrock of the homeworld. A low, resonant thrum of immense, barely contained power. The Conclave's leading elements were now within direct firing range of the forge itself. Their colossal particle cannons charging, their intent clear. There was no time left, and then the Nova Forge answered. It did not unleash a beam of destruction. It did not create a localized black hole, nor did it detonate a star. Instead, the forge, now fully activated, pulsed with an immense, silent wave of pure, unadulterated information. It was a resonance, a frequency that permeated every known conclave technology, every vessel, every command system, every automated process. This was not an attack on physical structures, but on the asterisk underlying principles asterisk of their engineering. The Nova Forge had analyzed, processed, and then broadcasted a counterfrequency that resonated with the fundamental energy matrices of conclave technology, causing them to vibrate, destabilize, and ultimately unravel. Across the entire conclave, Armada chaos erupted anew, but this time it was systemic, irreversible. Warp cores, designed for stability, began to fluctuate wildly, threatening catastrophic breaches. Weapon systems, moments from firing, misfired, overloaded, or simply dissolved into showers of sparks. Navigation systems inverted, sending ships spiraling into dangerous trajectories. Automated drone fleets, already stalled by the previous pulse, began to dismantle themselves, their internal programming corrupted by the resonant frequency. The Aethel's judgment, the very symbol of conclave might, found its primary systems failing, its ancient, powerful shields flickering erratically. Its command bridge plunged into a terrifying semi-darkness as critical systems collapsed. The conclave's technological superiority, their very foundation of power, was not destroyed, but rendered inert, exposed as inherently unstable against this new, terrifying form of Solaron mastery. It was a cosmic-level prank, revealing the Emperor had no clothes. The conclave's millennia of unquestioned authority evaporated in an instant. Their forces, unable to fight, unable to retreat effectively, were reduced to flailing, confused masses. Their mighty armada, meant to crush a nascent species, was now a fleet of drifting, failing hulks, their systems collapsing around them. This was not a defeat. It was a humiliation so profound it transcended mere battle. Humanity had not just repelled them, they had fundamentally broken their operational paradigm. The Vryle, their ancient eyes wide with a terror they had not known for eons, issued the only order possible, a full, uncoordinated, desperate retreat. Those ships whose systems had not entirely failed, those commanders who could still exert some control, turned tail and fled, leaving behind a vast, silent graveyard of crippled vessels. The Grand Conclave of Aethel, the undisputed rulers of the galaxy, had been driven from Solaron space, not by overwhelming force, but by an answer so audacious, so brilliant, that it redefined the very concept of power. The aftermath was swift and cataclysmic for the old order. News of the Conclave's humiliation, of the Nova Forge's silent Systemic unraveling of their technology exploded across the galaxy. Subjugated species, long oppressed, saw the chink in the armor of their masters. Rebellions, once impossible dreams, ignited on 1,000 worlds. The Lumina client states, the Vorlag vassal worlds, the Xylos economic zones, all began to fracture, to rise up, emboldened by humanity's impossible victory. The Conclave's dominion, once absolute, began to crumble into 1,000,000 pieces. Its authority shattered, its power exposed as fragile. Humanity. From the ashes of a desperate defense rose not merely as survivors, but as the architects of a new galactic age. Their answer to the demand for surrender was not a plea for clemency, nor a desperate, futile attack. It was a statement: we will not be dictated to. And we will show you a power beyond your comprehension, a power that makes your ancient dominion obsolete. They had not sought to conquer, but to exist freely. And in doing so, they had unleashed a revolution that swept across the cosmos, reshaping alliances, sparking liberation, and etching their name into the very fabric of galactic history, forever changing the definition of power. The Council had demanded human surrender. Humanity's answer shattered a galaxy, and from the debris, a new era was born.